Welcome to the Innovation Meets Leadership podcast. Real inspiration for real innovators. If you're looking for innovation and leadership transformation, your journey starts now.
Welcome to the Innovation Meets Leadership podcast. I'm your host, Natalie Bourne. Hey, did you know my new book is out, Set It on Fire, The Art of Innovation? Head over to setitonfire.co right now to learn more. Well, today our guest is Nancy Lyons. Nancy is the CEO and founder of Clockwork Interactive, and her most recent book, Work Like a Boss, A Kick in the Pants Guide to Finding and Using Your Power at Work, is a roadmap for actions, attitudes, and attributes that will make work better for individuals and everyone around them. And I love her mission, which is super simple: make work better. Welcome to the podcast, Nancy.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Awesome. Well, hey, I want to dig in and just talk about your mission for a second. Make work better. I want to know more about the heart behind that. I want to know what inspired you to start that mission in the first place.
Sure. Well, I think for me personally, it was just having a career that was entirely built on internet technology. So the beginning of my career started at the beginning of the mainstream internet, if you can believe it. I'm like a grandma in internet years. And I've watched how the internet has changed people and culture and business. And yet people are sort of the last component to come along for the change that is possible. And so I started really speaking and writing about all of this a long time ago. Little did I know that I'd launched the book in the midst of the pandemic and that these questions would be that much more amplified as we started to move through it. And so what I think now I'm mostly talking about, and where the book really shows up in relevant ways, is, as a culture, we're spending a lot of time talking about where people work, and we're spending far too little time talking about how people work, how we can use some of these advanced technologies to add value, how we can make our lives easier. I mean, right now, AI is all the rage. Everybody's talking about it. They're either terrified of it or they're excited by it. And nobody's really talking about how it can actually make our lives easier, right? And so when I talk about making work better, it's really about shifting the mindsets that people possess that prevent them from seeing the possibility for better quality of life and better quality of work life going forward.
So that one response, I have like a spidering of like 10 questions from that. But let's start with this first one that you mentioned, which is the where of people work. Why are we so focused right now on the where of where people work and not so much on the how? Because I agree with you. I think the how is actually a real challenge and nobody's talking about it. But right now, leadership, we see it in the news, right? People calling people back to the office. The where feels very heavily weighted and the how isn't really being talked about at all. Why is that?
Right. Well, I think it's because humans have a tendency to, stay entrenched in their routines. We like what we like, and that's what we've always liked, and we're not really interested in much else.
Mhm.
We also, the past is something that we're comfortable with because it's known. And the future, I mean, you write about innovation. So certainly this is a space where you spend a lot of time. The future is not something that humans are comfortable tackling
Mhm.
because the unknown is uncomfortable and we don't like discomfort. And so I think what we're seeing too is a lot of CEOs just tapping into what they know, what has worked, because they're responsible for delivering performance. Performance is measured by numbers. The only way they know how to deliver the numbers is the way they've already done it. And so they're asking people to come back and listen. I don't want to diminish the value of people being together. We need each other. And I think that we are looking at what we used to be, and we're acknowledging that reality of people needing each other, and we're expecting we'll just snap back. But that pandemic changed us.
Yeah.
Whether you got the shot or not, whether you believe in masks or not, none of that even matters anymore. What matters is we are changed. I just read an article yesterday, and maybe you saw it. I don't even know where it was. Might have been the HuffPost, but they were basically saying, the headline read something like, yes, we'll go back to work if our Fortune 500, Fortune 1000 companies will pay for our commute, our childcare, our
Yep.
food in the middle of the day. Like, yeah, we'll go back there if you take away the strain
Mhm.
that feels that much more profound since we've had this opportunity to be home and operate in a different way.
Yeah. That's the real crux of the issue is what did change us during that time and why is it so hard for us to go back to the way things used to be? I think that's part of the problem. It's not innovative, right? To say, "Hey, let's go back to the way things used to be," versus saying, "How do we continue to evolve as a society in terms of what work should look like in the future?" Nobody's saying, "What does work look like in the future?" Everyone is saying, "Let's go back to what we had." Like, let's go back to before 2020 all hit us. And I think we're kind of past that and beyond that. And that's why we're seeing the landscape of work change. Let's take a second and talk about AI. That was another component that you brought up that I think is very important. Lots of controversy on AI right now. All
Mhm.
right. Like you said, some love it, some hate it, some think it's going to take over the world. There are real benefits to AI if it's trained, if people know how to train AI and use it properly. I also feel personally that it can be very harmful when it's not trained and when people don't know how to use it because it just comes off generic. As a matter of fact, zoom out. You could look at anyone's social media post right now and you know whether or not they used AI or not because AI drops in a little emoji or icon at the beginning of each sentence. Sometimes it's two, and there's some repetitive language it uses. So even the future of work for us is not it's not about quantity. It has to be about quality. And so we're seeing that sometimes if you don't train the AI, it can kind of mess up the way that we work in the sense of it can actually create more barriers than open doors for us as well. I would love your thoughts on that.
Yeah, AI comes up every single day, working in the tech space. We have so many clients that are curious about it, so many clients that are nervous about it. We have, people asking us for recommendations around tools that'll make their lives easier. And I think, and the question that I get when I go out and speak, and, right now it's a really busy season for speaking. So I feel like I'm answering this question at least once a week. Are robots going to take our jobs? And my answer to that is pretty pat. It's, no, robots aren't going to take your jobs. But I think what we have to be afraid of are people that are comfortable and curious around exploring AI, and the people that are interested in training it and the people that are interested in harnessing the power of it. Those people might take your jobs. And I think that's the important thing that we all have to think about. How can we make ourselves part of the AI movement versus resisting it so much that we find ourselves left behind?
Mhm.
And I think that, for me, and I absolutely agree with you, it could be a very dangerous thing. And I think we have to get real clear as organizations, as employers, what our expectations of the use of AI look like. And as consultants who provide AI or consult around appropriate artificial intelligence for our clients, one thing we have to get really, really clear on is ethical use of AI. And before we can even get into the ethical use, we have to ensure that the data that trains the AI represents the actual diversity of the populace,
Mhm.
which we know doesn't have. I mean, our books don't, the history books don't. So how can we expect that the data that will train our future focused technology is going to represent people of color and differently abled people and, different cultures and races and ethnicities and viewpoints and perspectives? We have to insist that we train these tools to represent the world the way it actually is, not in the whitewashed way we have created the story of it. And I
Mm.
think that's point A. I think point B is we can't irresponsibly just dive in, right? We have to, as organizations or consultants or businesses that are either using or bringing AI to clients or customers, we have to think long and hard about governance and workflow and ethics. How
Mhm.
will we use it? How transparent will we be in the use of it? I think all of that is really important. And we're all so busy, let's face it. Most people are so darn busy that I think the real danger is being too busy to pay close enough attention to how this can shift or change our business and how people can use it inappropriately.
Yeah, that's wisely said. I do think that the busyness that we all find ourselves in is part of the bigger challenge. So let's zoom out. I want to dig in a little bit to your book. Tell me, like, what is the premise of the book? What would you say is your favorite chapter in the book, and why? And what is that chapter all about?
Well, the book, I just did a speaking gig yesterday at a big corporate organization, and I was telling them about the book, and I shared this little anecdote that is totally true and everybody always is amused by. And that is, when I was writing the book, the marketing team at the publishing house asked me, okay, who's the audience, right? They want to start building a marketing plan. I was like, everybody. And they were like, that's the dumbest thing we've ever heard,
They
basically. Like,
always get that question, don't they?
right. Yeah.
Or that answer, rather. Yeah.
Exactly. And they're like, and they were saying, who are you writing it for? And I would say that most business books are written for executive leadership,
Mhm.
management, middle management, but we miss everybody else.
Yeah.
And as an employer and someone who's been an employer for 25 years, I know what I see in the workforce that I employ. And also as a CEO of a company that serves Fortune 1000, Fortune 500 companies, largely in regulated industries, I also know how inefficient and siloed and, culturally dysfunctional so many big organizations are because of the
Mhm.
view I've had into them. And I know that people feel it and they talk about it. In fact, they complain about it, and they also position themselves as helpless with it, right?
Mhm.
It's not me who's driving this company, it's not me who's deciding on the direction. I can't make these changes. I'm only one person. And so I wrote the book to really give people a solid reminder, and that's the kick in the pants piece, that we all have agency, and that
Mhm.
the way work works was decided during the Industrial Revolution,
Yeah.
when there was a big chasm between the people that owned companies and and the employer and the employees that they pulled in to make the product and deliver on the company promises.
Mhm.
A huge, huge gap. And so the people that were employed just had to be grateful to have a job,
Right.
just had to be grateful to be able to feed their families. That's not the world we live in anymore. I employ people that are far beyond my abilities, that are much smarter than me, that have educational experience beyond mine and work life experience beyond mine. And to treat them as if they have no agency, but also to encourage that, makes no sense. And hierarchy, one of the points I make in the book, is that hierarchy displaces agency.
Mm.
It makes us forget that we have power. And so this book is really meant to be a kick in the pants to encourage people to remember that they are educated, that they are experienced, that they are wise beyond measure, and that they are there for a reason. And the way organizations are structured, oftentimes we don't get to directly tap into those reasons, but those individuals should. They should bring them forward. They should use their voices. They should learn to take risk. They should take initiative and be part of the solution instead of part of the problem. And so that's sort of the general premise of the book. My favorite chapter, that's a tough one, because the first chapter is about owning your own garbage. It's about growing your self-awareness, seeing how you show up as part of the problem,
Mhm.
and discovering those tiny mindsets you can shift. But I think my favorite chapter would be about fear, and
Mm.
about how fear paralyzes every single human in one way or another, whether it's how we show up in meetings, whether it's whether or not we raise our hands with big ideas, whether it's taking a risk or taking or putting ourselves out there.
Yeah.
One of the points I make is the kinds of fear that women feel that men have no clue about, right? Like yesterday, and in a lot of talks that I do in corporate, I'll say, there's 5 fears that show up in the workplace: the fear of conflict, the fear of the unknown, the
Mhm.
fear of, what other people will think. But the fears that show up for women that don't show, we all fear doing something stupid. We all fear
Yeah.
saying or doing something stupid. But women have been trained from a very young age not to outshine their male counterparts, especially at work. So women are afraid of looking too smart,
Mm.
of not giving credit. And when I say that, and I say it very often, the men in the room, their mouths drop open. And then I say, I know you're uncomfortable right now, but look around at the women. They feel seen, right? And so I think that fear chapter really points out the ways in which fear makes us less than in the workplace, and the way and the things we can do to control it and see ourselves as more valuable and show up stronger.
I love what you're leaning into here because a lot of it is around almost like learned helplessness. It's
Hmm.
kind of what you're leaning into. So there's different ways that we have all learned to survive, if you will, in the current climate. Whether that is true survival that we feel, will actually help us to exist in that environment, or whether it's lies, right, that we've believed and kept in our mind so long that they feel like the truth. Either way, they impact how we show up at work and whether or not we believe we can make an impact at work. And so what you're leaning into here I think is so important. I think that most people just don't believe that they can make an impact. They don't actually ask the question. I think what's worse in an environment is when you do ask the question but you're shot down. And I
Hmm.
think that there are I would say 80% of the challenge is just not asking the question because you're the fearfulness that the person's going to reject you or say, "Hey, no thanks." But even worse is the 20% that do lean in and ask and they kind of hit that ceiling, right? You're
Hmm.
told, "Hey, just stay in your lane, stay in your place, do what you're told." And so, but again, I love like if I could put it in that 80/20 thought process, 80% of folks probably deal with that, but they don't ever express it. It's just kinda in their mind.
Hmm.
They don't ever ask the question, "Could I have a bigger impact?" They just assume the impact is not there for them to have.
Hmm. Very well said. Yeah, absolutely.
And so this is great. I love what you're leaning into in the book. I love the different ways that you're looking at this. Let me ask a question. If someone's listening to this podcast right now and they're a leader, what would you say are just some takeaways from your book that they can do differently to better engage their team, to better break down some of these hierarchies that we know exist, and to help their team navigate around and through them? What would 2 or 3 things be that they could do differently?
Sure. Well, I think that, I wrote an article several years ago about how middle management is stifling innovation. And I think that, leaders have a tendency to, and especially those folks that we see in middle management, to forget why they hired people in the first place, right? They bring them in and they're excited about them, but then they become part of that culture, whether it's functional or not. They become part of the existing processes, whether they're functional or not. And I think there's an opportunity for leaders, one, to read the book and put themselves in the position of the people they lead,
Mhm.
and to invite them to show up stronger and make space for that. I think that in the book, I call out qualities of leadership, but they're not unique to people with fancy titles, right? We should all be showing up for work with that. And I think that what leaders forget often is that when we hire better than ourselves, it doesn't just have an impact on the organization, it also makes us look real good. And so I think creating these safe spaces for people to explore who they are and who they could be in the context of these work environments is a leader's responsibility, which means they need to listen more, right? They need to have more consideration around engagement. When everyone isn't engaged in a meeting or a conversation, it's up to the leader to recognize that and to explore the whys.
Mhm.
And I also think, this is sort of subtext in the context of that, but I think it's up to a leader to understand the different communication styles of their teams so that they recognize that just because somebody isn't the loudest doesn't mean they don't have the most innovative ideas. And so how do we make space for everyone? Right. I mean, I do think that psychological safety requires intention,
Mhm.
and leaders that are thinking about the content of this book have to have the intention to create the safe spaces to allow the leaderly qualities of their teams to emerge. So that's what I would encourage leaders to do. I also think, let's be honest. I wrote this book as a leader, and oftentimes I found myself writing about the things I wish I could say to people, you know, like, why are you doing that? every leader gets frustrated with their teams, feels like they're not getting what they need,
Right.
feels like they wish they could have these heart-to-heart conversations. This is the heart-to-heart conversation that every leader needs to have with their teams. And so generally speaking, when leaders read this book, they end up buying it for their entire teams. And I think it opens up conversation. It opens up the collaborative energy necessary to create psychological safety. It opens up a feeling of freedom to actually be a little more of a risk taker, to use our voices in different ways. And so I think, as a leader, if you're not willing to have those conversations, I am.
Hmm. That's good. That's good. And I feel, Nancy, you're just leaning into some questions that leaders need to be asking themselves. And I think there's something beautiful about asking your team, hey, are we a team that creates psychological safety, or are we a team that you feel like you have to self-protect, right? When you come to meetings, when you do, you have to armor up, right, to come into a room, or do you feel like you can truly bring your whole self and your true self to a meeting and show up authentically you and be a part of the conversation, be a part of solving the problem that we have, at hand? Or do we um do we kind of do the opposite of those things? And so I think that's part of, I think, leadership, and part of being a leader is being willing, being brave enough to ask hard questions, even maybe when we don't have time to implement the answers, but we need to, right? We have to wade into those waters, and we have to do what it takes to lead effectively. I think, my career has spanned over 20 something years, and I think about the times when I look back, 10, 15 years, it didn't matter. I mean, yes, the project and the results mattered, but what mattered was the relationships we created, because those are the people you're going to see again. And I think the older you get, the more you realize, hey, you're going to run into these people again. This world is big, but it's small. And
Mhm.
so we should be focused on relationships, because relationship is currency, and it really feeds the engine of innovation and ingenuity, right? Being able to cross pollinate, being able to work together better. And I love that you took time to kind of not only write about this, but make it your mission, which is to really help people work better together.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I agree. I think we need leaders to show up, but also to make space. We need leaders to be strong, but also to have the ego strength to allow their teams to show up equally as strong, or even ride right over them. And, I think that's, I said yesterday in this talk I was doing, Brene Brown made a lot of money talking about vulnerability, but where she doesn't show up as strong, and God bless Brene Brown, this is no diss, is in talking about how to receive the vulnerability of others.
Yeah.
And I think in order to make these spaces, we have to be able to receive the vulnerability, which means the fear or the trepidation of the people on our teams without judgment.
Mhm.
And frankly, I think that's what we need to be, you know, eh, more diverse. I mean, when you think about all the things that are challenging us right now, we've relegated diversity to, EDI to an island. That's a
Mhm.
initiative that some person is taking care of. But if we actually think differently as leaders about how we welcome people, about being intentional, about doing business and infusing everything we do with an intention around belonging,
Mhm.
if we're doing that and we're accepting people who are differently abled and who people who make us uncomfortable because they challenge us,
Yeah, that's
if
good.
we're doing that, we are actually setting ourselves up for a better entree into the future of work.
I love that. That is a beautiful final thought. Thank you for leaving us with that. Where can people find and follow you? Where can they find your book? Give us the title again one more time, and help people find it.
Well, thanks for asking. You can find my book. It is anywhere you buy books. You can even go to your indie bookseller and ask them to order the book. But if you really want it immediately, you can order it on Amazon. You can also go to Itasca Books, or you can just go to worklikeaboss.com, and any book purchasing options will be there. You can find me at nancylyons.com. You can find my company at clockwork.com. And I'm on all the socials as Nylons, Nylons, because that's how people see my name. When I put N Lions, they see Nylons. So I owned it. Now the young folks don't even know what nylons are. So
Right.
it works, right? Yeah.
That's awesome. That's fun. Thank you for that. And thank you so much for your time today, Nancy. This has been awesome.
Hey, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Well, to our listeners, thank you for joining the Innovation Meets Leadership podcast. And remember, don't just get out of the box, break the box and set it on fire. Let's go transform something.
Thank you for joining us for the Innovation Meets Leadership podcast. Be sure to subscribe to our show on iTunes. Follow us on Instagram or Facebook at Innovation Meets Leadership. And visit our site at innovationmeetsleadership.com for more innovation resources.
Hey, my new book is out, Set It on Fire, The Art of Innovation. Click on the link to learn more. And don't just get out of the box, break the box and set it on fire. Let's go transform something.